Have you ever paused to truly ask yourself, who am I? It sounds like a simple personal question, right? Something for quiet reflection. But what our sources reveal is that the answer goes far beyond personal introspection. It's profoundly entwined with something that shapes pretty much every aspect of our lives: power.
You've hit on something vital there, and that's exactly what this deep dive is all about. The incredibly fluid, dynamic, and, well, often surprising relationship between identity and power, how they continuously shape each other, from your most personal sense of self all the way up to global narratives. We've pulled from a stack of incredible sources today: social psychology, political theory, cultural studies, and some really insightful leadership research, too.
Right. Our mission today is basically to give you a shortcut to understanding these profound connections. We'll unpack how your sense of self, both as an individual and as part of larger groups, is shaped by power, and just as important, how the very way power is defined and used influences everything around us, from national stories right down to those quiet everyday relationships. Expect some surprising facts and, as always, plenty of engaging insights. So let's unpack this. We all think we know what identity is, but our sources confirm it's far from simple. It's complex and incredibly fluid. Where do we even begin to define it?
Well, we can start by understanding identity as our sense of who we are, both as unique individuals and as members of various groups. But crucially, it's also heavily influenced by how others perceive and label us. Beverly Daniel Tatum, a psychologist and educator, she captures this beautifully. She asks questions like, who do my parents say I am? Who do my peers say I am? What message is reflected back to me in the faces and voices of my teachers, my neighbors, store clerks? What do I learn from the media about myself? How am I represented in the cultural images around me? Or am I missing from the picture altogether? It's a powerful set of questions, really highlighting that while some parts of your identity might feel fixed, others are definitely fluid. They change.
So it's not just my definition versus their definition. It's sort of a fundamental split there. That brings us to personal versus social identity. What's the key distinction?
Yeah, the distinction is vital. Personal identity refers to the unique ways you define yourself. This is where you have agency, right? You emphasize aspects like your family, your religion, your interests, what you believe makes you, you. Now contrast that with social identity. That's your sense of self derived from your membership in specific groups. These could be based on ability, age, economic class, ethnicity, gender, nationality, language, race, religion, sexual orientation, a whole range of things. What's interesting is that we're often born into many of these groups. And sometimes you might even find yourself placed into a group you don't fully identify with, like checking a box for Asian, but maybe you truly identify as Pacific Islander. It's that external categorization versus how you define yourself inside.
That distinction makes a lot of sense. Okay, building on that, how do these individual identities start to knit together to form something larger, like, say, a nation or an entire community?
That's where collective identity comes in. This is the shared sense of belonging and identity that individuals get from being part of social groups. Our sources describe it as essentially a statement of membership. It involves being part of a group where members feel they share things in common. It's formed and shaped by, well, shared membership, social norms, cultural values, leadership, and broader social influence. It's that feeling of we rather than just I.
Okay, so we've explored how fluid and complex our identities are. But what's the engine driving some of those shifts, both personal and collective?
It often seems to come down to power. We tend to think of power as just, someone at the top, a president or a CEO, right? But as our sources reveal, it's far, far more nuanced than that. It absolutely is. Professor Detra Keltner, a psychologist at UC Berkeley, offers a definition that really broadens our view. Power is essentially someone's capacity to alter another person's condition or state of mind. Quote. He explains this happens by providing or withholding resources, things like food, money, knowledge, affection, or by administering punishment, physical harm, firing someone, even social ostracism. This definition highlights three crucial aspects. First, it's always about a resource, something someone else values. Second, it's incredibly manifold, meaning there are many, many kinds of power, not just one, many types. And third, it's always contextual. What works in a boardroom might be useless in a family argument, These distinctions really show just how inadequate that simple you either have it or you don't idea of power really is.
So it's not just a binary. It's much more complex. What are the different forms of power that are subtly shaping our lives every single day then?
We can broadly categorize them. First, there are personal powers. These reside within you, whether they're innate or acquired, and they're somewhat context independent. Think about your expertise in a specific field or your accumulated experience. Your relationship ability, that's your network, your knack for making friends. And then there's personal power itself, which includes things like self-awareness, emotional intelligence, resilience, poise. These powers truly go with you wherever you go. Then you have social powers. These are the powers that are bestowed upon you or earned from others, and they tend to be context-specific. This category includes social status, things like wealth, connections, race, gender, education, socioeconomic status, religion, nationality, ethnicity, physical and mental ability, sexual orientation. There's positional power, which comes from formal roles in organizations like being a manager or a CEO. Very clear cut. And finally, informal or contextual power. This comes from things like popularity, seniority in a group, alliances, or simply aligning well with a group's norms. These are those rank dynamics we feel everywhere, right? Schools, work, even families.
Okay, so personal power, social power. And then there's this much broader, almost philosophical concept from the French philosopher Michel Foucault. He famously said, power is everywhere. How do we even begin to grasp that? It sounds huge.
Foucault's concept is truly profound, yeah? And it's where things get really interesting and maybe a bit tricky. He argued that power isn't just wielded by specific people or groups through obvious, coercive acts. Instead, he saw it as diffused, pervasive, and deeply embodied in our discourse, our knowledge, and what he called regimes of truth. For Foucault, power doesn't just push you around, it actually constitutes agents. It makes us who we are, in a way. He introduced the idea of power knowledge. Power is formed through the accepted forms of knowledge, through what counts as truth in a society. So the battle for truth, as he put it, isn't about finding some absolute objective truth, but rather about the rules that distinguish true from false, and the power effects attached to those distinctions. What's crucial is that Foucault saw power as productive, not just negative or repressive. He stated, power produces reality. It produces domains of objects and rituals of truth. Think of disciplinary power in institutions like prisons and schools. It leads to self-discipline through surveillance, often subtle. Or biopower, controlling physical bodies by setting norms for behavior. It's subtle, it's pervasive, and it shapes our very existence.
Right. So if Foucault's right and power is in everything and our identity is constantly shifting, does that mean we're just, I don't know, pawns in this grand game?
Yeah.
Or do we have any agency? How do they really interact in this constant dance?
It's definitely a nonlinear relationship, and agency is still very much a factor, absolutely. But often within frameworks set by power. As our sources highlight, the power of authority organizes and propels itself through notions of identity, and simultaneously, identity is constructed according to the interests of power. It's a two-way street, but maybe not an equal one. You can see this throughout history. Consider how the Romans first prosecuted Christians, then later became defenders of an empire said to be rooted in Christianity. That's a huge shift. Or how the Turks spread Islam after adopting it. These empires consolidated their power through what some call identity manipulation, redefining their subjects as they expanded. A really clear example comes from colonial powers. They redefined their subjects using tools like the census counting and categorizing people.
Right, putting people in boxes.
Exactly, and the map to draw new borders, often ignoring existing realities, and the museum to rewrite history and create these imagined communities and narratives. The very label of Indonesia, for instance, emerged largely as a result of colonial rule, creating a shared identity among disparate peoples where one didn't entirely exist before in that specific way.
That's a powerful example, how external forces really shape internal identity. This raises an important question then. How does heritage factor into this complex interplay between identity and power? It seems like it would be a critical, maybe even contested area.
Heritage is absolutely central, yeah, and it often is a battleground. Our sources explain that heritage and collective identity are mutually informing concepts, meaning without a sense of heritage, collective identity cannot be constructed, and vice versa. Without a sense of collective identity, heritage also cannot be constructed. They need each other. Heritage is often used as a form of collective memory, but it's more than just a historical record, you see. It's a social construct shaped by the political, economic, and social concerns of the present. That's key. So heritage is very present-centered. It often reflects what we want the past to be, and it's frequently used to justify current political acts or national narratives.
And what's fascinating here is this concept you mentioned earlier, authorized heritage discourse, where the language of the powerful, the elite, actually shapes how heritage is interpreted, what stories get told, and maybe what gets left out.
That's a key insight, absolutely. And we see it vividly when you compare, say, the Australian government's criteria for heritage sites versus UNESCO's global criteria. Let's take the Royal Exhibition Building in Carlton Gardens in Melbourne, Australia. Great example. When it gained World Heritage listing in 2004, it was under only one UNESCO criterion, just one. That criterion focused on its role in the global influence of 19th and early 20th century international exhibitions. It reflected an exchange of human values and architecture and technology on a universal scale, global significance. But in stark contrast, that same site fulfilled 5 national criteria for Australia's National Heritage List. 5. For example, one national criterion focused on its importance in the course or pattern of Australia's natural or cultural history, specifically because it hosted Australia's first parliament in 1901.
Which is huge for Australia, obviously.
Yeah. Exactly. Hugely important nationally, but maybe not globally unique enough for that specific UNESCO list. This clearly demonstrates a preference being given to the authorized national heritage dialogue. Why? Because national power structures currently have more influence in defining and protecting national heritage. Even though a global identity exists, that powerful need for nations to create compelling national narratives often outweighs the influence of globalization when it comes to picking and choosing heritage.
Okay, so we've seen how power shapes identity on this grand scale empire's national heritage. But power dynamics are also absolutely at play in our daily lives, right? In our personal relationships, affecting everything from how we interact to how we feel about ourselves.
That's a crucial point, yeah. Take gender dynamics, for instance. These refer to the relationships and interactions based on gender, and they're deeply informed by sociocultural ideas and, yes, power. Depending on how they play out, gender dynamics can either reinforce existing norms or challenge them. Ideas about gender, well, they're learned from so many sources: media, family, religion, just observing the world around us. And when these ideas become traditional or stereotypical, especially with rigid gender binaries, they can be incredibly harmful. They can lead to unhealthy, unequal relationships where, for example, one person makes all the decisions, holds all the power. It's vital to remember, though, as one source put it, power in and of itself is not bad. It is how we use our power that makes all the difference.
That's a really important distinction. Power isn't inherently evil. So power can be productive, as Foucault explained, but also pretty dangerous if misused. What actually happens psychologically when people gain power? And how does it affect those around them?
This is the psychology of power, and it's a fascinating, almost paradoxical area. Gaining power actually changes you. You tend to become more confident, more decisive, which, sounds good on the surface, but it also tends to decrease your interest in feedback from others, and even your empathy towards them. This can lead to faulty decision-making and actions that disadvantage or demoralize people around you. And here's the crucial part. Power also changes the people around you. They start to defer more, they might feel intimidated, they don't speak up as readily.
So you get less honest feedback.
Exactly. This results in less feedback for the person in power, and what they do get is often skewed or inaccurate. It's filtered. This double whammy where power changes both you and those around you makes it very easy to go astray and become corrupted by the effects of power. It's almost like a built-in risk, isn't it?
Wow, yeah. I could definitely see how easy it would be to fall into that trap without constant vigilance. So what are some of those key psychological influences we should be aware of?
Let's break them down. First, there's disinhibition. This is basically the freedom to not fit in or adapt. You feel less constrained by social norms. Now, this can lead to revolutionary thinking. Think of a Martin Luther King Jr. challenging societal norms, right? That's disinhibition used productively. But it can also manifest as annoying, self-serving behavior. Leaders might interrupt constantly, bully, or critically ignore expert advice because they're overly certain of their own opinions. They feel they don't need to listen. Next, there's illusory control. This is the belief that you can influence outcomes that are actually way beyond your reach. It's linked to optimism, which can be a valuable leadership trait, sure, but it can also lead to a delusional disregard of facts. Think about the captain of the Titanic ignoring iceberg warnings, or Napoleon invading Russia in winter. It's not just arrogance, it can be a fundamental psychological shift that blinds them to vital feedback and reality. And then there's diminished empathy. This is a real impediment to considering the impact of your actions on others, or even just taking their perspective. Now, sometimes leaders need a degree of detachment to make tough decisions for a whole group, okay? But it's a really common path towards corruption. It leads to people being seen as means to an end. We've seen this play out in situations like the Wells Fargo scandal, where employees were pressured into unethical behavior to meet sales quotas, or the Flint water crisis decisions.
Right, where the human cost wasn't fully considered.
Precisely. And finally, remember that magnifying lens of power we touched on. When you're in power, your simple comments can sound like commands. Your casual opinions become strategy. Even a flippant remark can ruin someone's week or derail a project.
Absolutely. It's like you're speaking through a megaphone, even when you think you're just whispering. This lens sounds like it really diminishes creativity, talent, feedback, and engagement because people just hold back. They play it safe.
Exactly. And without that accurate feedback, leaders can become completely out of touch and corrupted by power. It's a dangerous, self-reinforcing cycle.
So given all these pitfalls, what does this all mean for us? How can we make power work for us and for the greater good rather than having it corrupt us? It sounds like we need some kind of antidote, some strategy.
That's where this concept of power intelligence comes in. It's defined as the ability to recognize, manage, and use your powers effectively to benefit both yourself and others. The deepest insight from our sources today isn't just that power changes you, but that actively managing its subtle psychological pull, cultivating what these experts call power intelligence, is the only real way to wield it for good, even against your own brain's wiring, potentially. So one key strategy is to get regular feedback. And not just any feedback you need, the uncomfortable kind, right? The stuff that lies outside your self-confirming beliefs.
The stuff you might not want to hear.
Exactly. How do you get it? Well, simple things. Don't go first in discussions. Let others speak. Reward participation, even disagreement. Model fallibility, ask questions. Admit you don't have all the answers. You also need to build a culture of feedback. Train people in constructive debate, make conflict feel safe, bring in external advisors who aren't caught up in the internal dynamics, and actively seek out those minority reports, the dissenting opinions. Second strategy, maintain composure. When you feel weak or powerless, paradoxically, you tend to use power poorly, maybe defensively or aggressively. Self-regulation is key here. Become self-aware about what triggers you, manage your stress, prioritize self-care like sleep and exercise, seriously. And have trusted individuals, friends, coaches, therapists to talk to get perspective. An emotionally unstable leader can wreak havoc. And third, be aware of all your powers and know how, when, and why to use them. Take an inventory. What are your personal powers? What are your social powers in this context? Then ask yourself tough questions. If you have strong personal power and you're socially bold, are you using that voice just to push your own agenda? Or are you using it to invite in newcomers, advocate for those less able to speak up, make sure every idea gets heard? If you have the power of expertise, are you sharing that knowledge generously to help the team make the best decisions? Or are you just hoarding it to sound smart? Do you use your broad network just to find opportunities for yourself, or do you actively use it to find opportunities for others too? By asking these questions, you can start to use your power wisely and much more productively.
That makes so much sense. And connecting this back to collective identity, the power of collective identity can also be harnessed for profound social good, right? Not just for consolidating authority or for individual gain.
Absolutely. We've seen its crucial role in social movements throughout history. It provides that shared sense of purpose and identity that can mobilize individuals for significant social change. Think of the civil rights movement in the United States or the global feminist movement. Both were propelled by a strong sense of collective identity, uniting diverse individuals under a common cause, a shared we important. And there are strategies to promote positive intergroup interactions and reduce conflict. Things like promoting superordinate identities, finding common ground that transcends specific group distinctions, encouraging intergroup contact and cooperation, fostering empathy and understanding, and encouraging positive representations of outgroups in media and culture.
So we've journeyed through this really intricate landscape of identity and power, from the deeply personal to the global stage, seeing how they aren't static, isolated concepts at all, but they're constantly in motion, shaping and reshaping each other in, well, profound ways.
Indeed. We've seen how heritage and identity are mutually informing, constantly constricting each other, and how this construction is directly affected by shifts in power dynamics, both nationally and globally. Ultimately, whether we're talking about individual interactions or grand historical movements, it really does seem to come down to how we choose to use our power. That makes all the difference.
So considering that power influences what is preserved as heritage and shapes collective memory,
Yeah.
here's a final thought for you to take away. What would you want future generations to remember about your collective identity, whatever that may be, and what powers might you need to influence that narrative?
And as you move through your daily life, in the news you consume, the history you encounter, we encourage you to keep observing these dynamics. Reflect on how identity and power are shaping the world around you, because believe me, they are always at work.